So today we're talking about your son, Alex, and I want to thank you for being willing to share this story. I'm sure it's hard to relive it and share what happened, but it is so important to share his incident. And would you mind sharing Alex's crash with us?
Absolutely. And the great thing is that it is painful to look back and to remember, but I feel so fortunate every single day, Becky, that my son is alive and well. He's engaged. He's bought a home. He has gone on to live his life in spite of the terrible crash that he was involved in. And having worked with so many wonderful advocates over the years who have lost loved ones, most recently, in passing the hands-free law in Massachusetts, we worked with a dozen or more advocates who lost children and fathers and grandfathers and brothers and sisters. And when I see their pain, I feel so fortunate that my story has a happy outcome. And that's largely due to seatbelts, which is why I'm so passionate about seatbelts. But I will tell the story of Alex because I think, especially for teens, it really resonates. Alex himself has talked to a lot of media folks and teen groups over the years to tell his story. Um, this happened in 2008. So my oldest son, Alexander, was then a senior in high school. He had a difficult course load. He was applying to colleges, so he was working on his college essay and all of the things involved in applications. It's very time consuming. And he was playing on the football team. So he was going to practices every day, getting home at about 7 at night, doing homework until 10 or 11, not sleeping a lot, and having football games on the weekend. So like many teenagers, he was very, very busy and pretty sleep deprived. It was a Saturday night in early October. Alex had been invited to a homecoming dance in Fitchburg, Mass. He had met a really nice young lady at a concert. Her name was Lindsay. And Fitchburg's about 60 miles from our home in Norton, Mass, pretty much a straight shot up 495. So kind of a monotonous drive. Alex left at about 6 o'clock. He was all dressed up in a suit, dress shoes, looking handsome. We took some pictures. Always exciting to see your senior son going to a homecoming dance or a prom, anything like that. He told me later, kind of ominously, that he was already tired when he left for that evening for the homecoming dance around 6 o'clock. I didn't realize it at the time, and I probably should have. He had had a long week. He had played in a football game that day. And so really at that point, he just needed to go to sleep instead of going out for the evening and going on a long drive. But hey, he was 17. Lindsay was a wonderful young lady, as I said. He was a junior operator at the time, which in Massachusetts means that you have to abide by certain restrictions. And that meant he had to be home by 12:30 a.m. That's the junior operator restriction in Massachusetts, 12:30 to 5, you have to be off the road. So Alex had been driving for a while. He was a good driver, a confident driver, and he was always home in time for that junior operator curfew. So I knew I could rely on him to be home on time and to be safely in bed. So I woke up that morning about 2 a.m. And I have to say that as a mother of three, I knew right away that something was wrong. I did what I always do at that point, and I walked down the hall to check Alex's room to make sure he was safe in his bed, and he was not there. And I knew immediately at that point that something was wrong because he was always on time for that curfew. He was always home in time, and I just knew right away that something was wrong. So at that point, I did what every parent today does. I called Alex's cell phone repeatedly, and there was no response. He did not pick up. And unlike my daughter, who doesn't always pick up her phone when I call, my son had always picked up his phone when I called. So at that point, my sense of dread was really growing. I knew at that point that something was really wrong. So at that point, as a longtime news reporter, who was trained to call police barracks to sometimes hunt down a crash, I did what I had been trained to do, and that's what I did. I started calling state police barracks from Fitchburg right down the line to Foxborough near our house. Got my husband up, of course, and there were no reports of a crash from any of the dispatchers or police officers who were working on the desk early that morning. So in the meantime, here's what Alex was going through. He was driving home alone. Fortunately, Lindsay was not with him. He had dropped her off at her home in Fitchburg, and he was nodding off at that point at the wheel. And that should have been the first signal to him that he needed to pull over and rest or sleep or call someone to call us to come get him. But he didn't. Like many drowsy drivers, he was close to home. He was only about 15 minutes away. He was desperately tired, desperate to get home and go to sleep, go to bed, and he thought he could make it. And this is a common problem and issue with drowsy drivers, that they're often close to home and they think, oh, if I can just hold out another 5 to 10 minutes, I'll be fine. Bad decision. At about midnight, Alex woke up. He had nodded off and he realized that he was on the side of the road and he was taking down the reflectors on the berm of the road. So at that point, being a young, inexperienced driver, and I think many of us actually would have reacted this way no matter how experienced, he panicked and he overcorrected the wheel. He turned the wheel sharply to the left to get back up onto the road when he saw that he was on the side of the road. And that sharp turn, abrupt turn, sent his pickup truck cartwheeling across 3 lanes of 495 South,
Wow.
just south of the Rentham outlets. So, and he had been traveling at, fairly high rate of speed, 60 miles an hour. So the velocity of that cartwheeling crash slammed him into a rocky cliff on the left-hand side of the road of 495 South. He was immediately upside down in the cab of the truck. His cheek was on the pavement. His face was full of glass, lacerated. He had broken his shoulder. He had bruised his lung, we would find out later. But the great thing is that Alex was alive and conscious, and that's because he had his seatbelt on. I have no doubt that the seatbelt saved his life given the force of the crash. And the EMTs certainly later agreed with us that the seatbelt saved his life and kept him alive. So at this point, as I said, Alex's cheek is on the pavement. The cab of the truck was so compressed that Alex could not even move his arm to get to his phone in his pocket to call for help. He was trapped so tightly. He actually focused on his breathing most of the time because that enabled him to keep his airway open. He was so compressed, he was afraid that his airway would close up, he wouldn't be able to breathe. And at the same time, he was also worried that the truck could catch on fire and he was completely trapped. So I give him such tremendous credit for having the presence of mind at 17 years old to just focus on his breathing, which calmed him down, which kept his airway open, because I'm not sure that I would have reacted in such a calm manner if I had been in a similar situation. So
he
clearly,
remained conscious the entire time.
He remained conscious the entire time and could hear the phone buzzing because his father and I were calling him over and over. So he knew that we were trying to get to him, but imagine his frustration that he couldn't even move his arm to get his, his phone in his pocket. So the wonderful thing that happened, in addition to him, he always wore his seatbelt, and I encourage everybody out there to always be belted because it's a total lifesaver. But in addition to being alive and belted and conscious and able to think and reason, he also was really saved by a guardian angel. I still don't know who this person is. I'm eternally grateful to this person, but a passerby saw the wreckage of the truck, which was hard to see. And plus it was late at night, this is about midnight, 12:30 at this point, dark, and saw the wreckage of the truck and didn't stop, but thank goodness called 911. And I am eternally grateful to that person, who I still call my guardian angel. Don't know who it is, but the EMTs arrived shortly after and told us later that they expected it to be a salvage operation when they looked at his truck and what kind of shape it was in. Well, Alex heard them. He had been trapped for almost 2 hours at this point. So he heard them, and he had one free hand that could not get to his phone in his pocket no matter how hard he tried, but he was able to pick up a jagged piece of metal with his free hand, Becky, and he began banging that piece of metal loudly on the wreck of the truck, and the EMTs heard him. And at that point, they began talking with him, and they began what was a very delicate rescue operation. In fact, it took 3 sets of the jaws of life to pry Alex out of the wreckage safely. So we visited the EMTs later. I baked brownies for them. We were just so incredibly grateful. I mean, the amazing work that our first responders and EMTs and rescue officials do on the roadside is just incredible. So back at home, meanwhile, back at the ranch, We were frantic at home at this point, as you can imagine. And finally, one of the EMTs was able to reach Alex's phone, which had continued to ring, continued to buzz, and he called me immediately. He said to me, I'll never forget it, your son is alive, but he's injured. Meet us at the trauma center at Rhode Island Hospital. I
What was your,
responded to
yeah, what
the
did you do? What was that moment like for you?
I can't say that I was surprised because at that point I knew that he had probably run into trouble on the road, but it was crushing. It was crushing. And I responded to the EMT. I said, where are you? And he gave me the location just south of the Rentham outlets on the North Attleboro line. And I said immediately back to the EMT, we are coming to you. If my son's going to die, he's not going to die alone on the highway. I'm coming to you. And my husband and I bundled up our younger kids, who were quite young at the time, and drove 2 cars. My husband drove the kids, I drove alone, and we drove to the scene of the crash. I have to tell you that as a news reporter, I've covered many crashes, many terrible crashes. And so I've seen all the apparatus and I'm familiar with, police officers on the scene. But to arrive in the dark and to see multiple fire trucks, rescue vehicles, police cars, EMTs, it was just a stunning scene. I will never forget the sight of that, knowing that it was my own child. It was really chilling. But the good news is when I got there and we parked, Alex was on the gurney, and I could see his feet with his fancy dress shoes on still, and they were shaking. And I talked to him right away, and he was conscious and lucid, and I was just so grateful. I actually was able to ride with Alex and the rescue
Oh, good.
to Rhode Island Hospital, where we discovered that he had a much more serious injury, something called a brachial plexus injury, which is really a very serious nerve damage that occurs when your nerves are literally stretched, which is what had happened to him when he was in the wreck of the pickup truck for so long, for 2 hours waiting for help. His nerves had actually stretched, and the result was that his left arm was paralyzed. And I have to say that was probably the biggest shock, because we could deal with a broken shoulder and a bruised lung and a lacerated, face, but the paralyzed arm was really a bombshell for us. And the good news is, the wonderful news is that, he was a tremendously active kid. He had been in great shape, playing football every day, running 2 miles for practice every day. And so that, youth and being in good shape definitely helped. And he spent at that point only about 3 days in the hospital, went back to school, carried his backpack with his good arm, did all of the things, got into college, enjoyed time with his friends, but he did occupational therapy 3 or 4 times a week with a wonderful occupational therapist, Laura, who I'm so grateful to this day. And she just was wonderful with him. And he was actually back in commission by the spring. His paralysis persisted for about a month. We went to many, many doctors, and we got some really terrible diagnoses and prognoses. One doctor said that he didn't think he would ever recover the use of his arm. And for such an active person and such a young person, that was really crushing. But we went to a wonderful doctor at Boston Children's Hospital, Peter Waters, and Dr. Waters from the beginning said, you're going to recover fully and you're going to be skiing in the spring.
Oh
And
my
Alex did
gosh.
go skiing in the spring. Yeah. So Dr. Waters, who's really one of the foremost specialists on brachial plexus injuries here in the Northeast, if not the foremost, the person, was right. And Alex worked hard, with his occupational therapy. And about a month after the crash, I remember he came down right here to the kitchen where I am today, ran down and looked at my husband, Tom, and me and said, I felt a butterfly flutter in my arm. And that was an incredible moment, Becky. And that was the beginning of his recovery. After he felt that little butterfly flutter that one evening, after that, he got better and better every single day. He got stronger to the point where, his arm was fully functional at the end of that year. So, and he went on to college, went on to Cornell to start college. So, I can't express my gratitude enough to all of the people involved, Dr. Waters, our occupational therapist, the EMTs at the scene, and that seatbelt and the ability and good judgment of my son in using that seatbelt. So that's why I'm so passionate about seatbelts, because they really do make a life or death difference. And, just so important to talk about drowsy driving and be aware of what it can do.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing that story. And how is Alex doing today? It sounds like he's doing great. It sounds like he's thriving. Can you tell us how he's doing today?
He's doing great. He owns a small farm in Connecticut, and he's actually a world champion giant pumpkin grower,
Get
which
out.
is kind of fun. Yeah, he grew two pumpkins, each weighing more than 2,200 pounds the
Wow.
year before last. Yeah. So, but he is engaged to a wonderful young woman who's a teacher in Connecticut. And he basically is a farmer in addition to many other things that he does. He does blacksmithing and metalworking and welding, et cetera, as well. But he was always interested in agriculture. So he's doing great. And again, I'm about to celebrate my birthday with him on Saturday. He's coming for dinner, and I'm just grateful every single day. And my heart goes out to the advocates out there whose children and brothers, sisters, grandparents, fathers, relatives, friends have been involved in crashes as well and have not survived, because I know from talking to them and spending so many years with them during my time at AAA just how painful that is. So I feel very fortunate.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm so happy to hear that Alex is doing well, and it's his story is not different from most typical teens. When you had mentioned he was on the football team, he was finishing his studies, getting ready to graduate, and so many teens are sleep deprived and we don't recognize it. I remember myself in high school staying up till very late finishing my homework because I was on the soccer team and I was on the theater, and their plates are so full. And I want to ask you, what is the actual amount of sleep we should be getting before getting behind the wheel?
Yeah, so at AAA, we recommend that before a trip, you should get at least 6 hours, but teens need much more sleep than that. And I think we found out since that research was done that most people, most of us need more sleep than that. And so certainly 7 to 10 hours a night. And teens need more sleep than the rest of the population because they're growing, their brains are still developing. And yet we know that teens are the most sleep deprived segment of the population. So we have the group that needs the most sleep getting the less sleep, or getting less sleep than they should be. So, I think one of the things that I really kicked myself for and beat myself up for after Alex's crash, as we all do as parents, is that I hadn't talked to him enough about drowsy driving. I hadn't even realized actually how tired he was. So as a traffic safety person at AAA, I had spoken to him ad nauseum about other important things: drunk driving, drug driving, distracted driving, cell phone use, all of those kinds of things I had spoken to him about. I had taken the parent class in Massachusetts. I knew all the rules and regulations. And that parent class, by the way, in Mass and Rhode Island is a tremendous resource. Uh, so I had talked to him about all of those kinds of dangers and hazards, Becky, but I had never thought to talk to him about the dangers of falling asleep at the wheel. And I have to say that after Alex was involved in the crash, he and I really embarked on a campaign to make people aware of how dangerous drowsy driving can be. I had only been at AAA for 6 months, and AAA National reached out to us, the two of us, and asked us to do a media tour. And Alex ended up on the Today Show, Good Morning America, Fox News, USA Today. He still does interviews from time to time. Actually, the Huffington Post did a piece on us. So he actually spent a fair amount of time talking about the dangers of drowsy driving, and he also testified at one of the primary seatbelt hearings in Rhode Island about the importance of seatbelts. So he really became involved in the issue as a young person. And I think we all know, especially you, as someone who works with youth driven, who works with teens all the time, that nothing resonates as much as peer guidance or peer advice. So teens listen to other teens, not necessarily always to their parents, but they definitely listen to other teens. And so I think it was very powerful for his friends to hear his story. He actually, in subsequent years, would not leave the driveway if everyone in the car wasn't buckled up, if he was driving friends. He actually, when he started dating his fiance, she would not wear a seatbelt in the back seat. And he said, you've got to buckle up in the back seat, just as important as the front seat. And, we won't go anywhere until you're buckled.
Good for him. That's not easy to do.
Yeah. So, well, when you're in love, you do things to make the other person happy. But, the point being that he really did spread the word to his young friends. And it was something that I always enforced as a parent. I remember having about 20 kids over to the house with my younger son. At one point, everybody was going to a concert, and I literally walked up and down the driveway as they were leaving to make sure everybody had their seatbelt on.
Right.
I mean, that's how passionate I am about it, because I know what kind of a difference it made for our family. It made a huge difference. It was everything. The seatbelt was everything for us.
I know it really, really was. And it's so nice to hear how much education you did give your son and your family about traffic safety. And it is so important in the parent role to educate and talk about these topics all the time, not just when the teen is about to drive, because it's almost too late at that point. And you made a really good point of talking about it all the time and making it a pressing issue throughout his childhood. And that's with drowsy driving. Like you said, it's just one of those topics with traffic safety that we don't talk enough about, where, we talk about drunk driving, impaired driving, and this is something that you don't even have to have a substance in you or be struggling with addiction. It could be just simple as you're a good student and you are overcommitted and you don't get enough sleep, and then you get behind the wheel and it's that quick it can happen. And it's something it's a really big issue.
Yeah, I think that's the thing about sleep that is so difficult, that when you are falling asleep at the wheel, it creeps up on you. It's very insidious. You often are not even aware that you're falling asleep. And I think that's one of the things that makes it so tricky, which is why it's so important to sleep well before you drive and to pull over and rest if you are falling asleep on the road. This is a very common universal problem. When we went into the hospital with Alex, into the trauma center at Rhode Island Hospital, every single doctor told us a story of having fallen asleep at the wheel while in medical school, while a resident. It's extremely common with medical students, with residents, with doctors, because they're so often sleep deprived. Shift workers, people who work overnight shift, often sleep deprived. And of course, we have many people in our society working 2 and 3 jobs. Are they getting a lot of sleep? No. I remember a story of a medical student. We had done a speech on this in Worcester, and there was a medical student in the audience, and she stood up and said that when she was in med school, she was so tired driving home one night that she opened her sunroof and put her ponytail out through the roof and closed the sunroof so that the pain of her ponytail in the sunroof would actually keep her awake.
Wow.
So these are the kinds of things we see people doing, drinking Red Bull or some kind of energy drink, coffee, playing the radio really loudly, opening the window so that the fresh air will wake you up. There's no other substitute for lack of sleep other than sleep. You have to pull over to a safe place and rest. And our AAA research, Becky, finds that across the country, more than 250,000 people fall asleep at the wheel every single day. Some for just microseconds, for just a second or two, but that still counts in the numbers. And in terms of crashes, our AAA research tells us that drowsy driving is a factor most likely in at least 10% of injury crashes. So, this is a universal problem. Have you ever felt tired while you were driving?
Yeah, I absolutely have. And I feel like we all have at one point or another. And I think the points you've made today are so important for everyone to hear. Is if you feel tired, there's no substitute other than sleep. You can't drink caffeine. You can't turn the radio on. You can't put the windows down. Your body and your brain need that sleep and will put you to sleep behind the wheel if you're that sleep deprived. So I think that's a great point to drive home today and have everyone hear. Even if it's just 20 minutes, pull over to a safe place, turn your car off, lock your doors, and sleep for 20 minutes. And is there a recommended amount of sleep that you should do? If you're feeling sleep deprived, is it 30 minutes, 40 minutes? Do you
You're
know?
right on the money with 20 minutes. That's what we recommend, 20 minutes. So that's just long enough to get you refreshed. I mean, there's no doubt that a cup of coffee or an energy drink would help. Certainly in that circumstance, we always tell people to take a break every 100 miles, get out and walk around your car, exercise. That will wake you up too. But again, no substitute for sleep other than sleep. And, Becky, you're a young parent. So you're probably sleep deprived in many ways. Um,
Yes.
and so again, this is a common problem, and it really just takes people being aware and being careful. The other thing that we talk about that's so important, talking to your children is so critically important. You may think they're not listening, but I always say to my kids, I hope that in your time of decision making, my voice comes back to haunt you. But one of the other things that's so important is just modeling good behavior for our children. So
That's exactly
I'm
where I was
sure.
going. Is just lead by example. You can't sit there and tell your kid don't text and drive and then you do it, or don't drive sleep deprived and then you stay up till 1 a.m. doing work and then drive them to school the next day. It's yeah. Sorry to cut you off too. Apologize.
Oh gosh, no, this is a conversation, and you're absolutely right. I love hearing about your experiences. We baby boomers are guilty too. I mean, there's so much media and publicity around teen use of cell phones, and clearly it's a distraction. But for example, in Massachusetts, junior operators can't use a cell phone. They can only use a cell phone in the event of an emergency when they're pulled over in a safe place. They can't talk hands free. There's no cell phone use for 16 and 17-year-olds in Mass, as you know. So, so modeling that behavior as a baby boomer, so many of us, you talked about playing soccer. I was a soccer mom and a baseball mom. You're on the phone, you're talking to your husband, you're arranging pickup, and you're completely distracted. So that's the time that you're modeling that behavior for your kids. If they see you distracted and on the phone, or if they see you angry at other drivers, or if they see you driving tired, they're simply going to model those behaviors when they start driving. My kids were actually my best little police force because I worked in traffic safety. And so if I even looked in the direction of my phone, they would say, Mom, you're a hypocrite, put that down.
Yeah.
So they were really a good stopgap for me in terms of keeping me honest and keeping me safe on the road.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's good to have those people in your life and reminders that, practice what you preach. And they're watching you all the time. For parents listening, your kids are watching and listening to you, whether you think they are or not. And so the things you say do matter, and the things you do matter as well. So I wanted to ask, is there any other points around drowsy driving you wanted to share, or tips for our audience?
Sure. So one of the things we advise again is that there's no substitute for lack of sleep other than sleep. So get plenty of sleep, especially if you know you have a long drive ahead of you. I mean, I mentioned the fact that Alex later admitted to me when we talked about it that he was already tired when he left for the homecoming dance. So Alex should have taken a nap. I should have insisted that he take a nap. It's tough because a lot of times with dances, you have to be in the facility in the dance by a certain time. So I think he was rushing to get there for that. But you just have to prioritize sleep. And it's funny, I talked to him very briefly this morning, told him I was going to be doing this podcast. And I said, what advice do you have? And he said, prioritize sleep every night, and it can happen to anyone. And I think, we all have this proclivity to say, oh, I'm the best driver. I can multitask. I would never do that. This is someone else's problem, et cetera, et cetera. But, we all make mistakes on the road. And that's why it's so important to be wearing the seatbelt all the time. I always say that your seatbelt will, in the end, protect you from all of the mistakes that we all make, young and old, as drivers. And it's the best tool we have to keep us alive in the event of a crash. It cuts your risk of dying in the front seat by 45% if you're belted, in the back seat by 50%. So it just makes an incredible difference in terms of keeping people alive. And in particular, I think it's so important for everyone, but so important for teens and young people to get into the habit of buckling up every trip, every time early. So get plenty of sleep before your trips. Travel when you normally would be awake. In other words, overnight driving is not a good idea. You should really stop and rest. Take a break, as I said, every 2 hours or 100 miles. Fuel up with a cup of coffee or an energy drink if that helps you. But again, I think just being aware of the importance of not driving tired is so important. And again, prioritizing your teenagers or your young students' sleep. College is another problem time. Lots of kids pulling all-nighters to get papers and study for exams. So, these are things, I think we have such a go-go society, Becky. We're so busy, and we pride ourselves in the United States on being busy and on how much we can get done and crossing items off the to-do list. And I think so much so that we sometimes neglect our sleep and neglect the importance of sleep. So I try to sleep as much as I can now.
Yeah,
you
you are.
know,
Yeah,
it's just so important. It impacts our quality of life in so many ways, and it definitely enhances our safety on the roadway.
absolutely. Sleep is one of those things that not many people think about, but if you really research it and read about it, it's so important to our health and overall well-being and our daily function and being able to comprehend conversations to everything from driving and keeping ourselves and everyone around us safe. So it's sleep is so important, and we don't highlight that enough. And I agree with you. Our society is a go go go, get it done. And unfortunately, as parents, we model that all the time, and our kids see that. So the expectation is there and they feel that. But I want to share a story with you. I had one student share with me one day that she just hadn't had enough sleep, and she was involved with everything. One of those students that just had a ton of clubs and orgs and sports and was on honor society. And one day she kind of broke down in front of her mom and said, "Mom, I have so much homework to do." It was after dinner, and she had finally had practice, showered, and had dinner, and it was like 9 o'clock at night. And then she had a couple papers to write. She just broke down in front of her mom, and her mom said, "You're not going to school tomorrow." And her daughter kind of looked at her like, "I have to go to school. I have this and this and this." And she said, "You're not going to school tomorrow because clearly you need rest and you need time to write that paper, not at 9 o'clock at night. And maybe this is a priority with scheduling, but at the same time, I was proud of that parent because that isn't easy to do. And most parents would say, "Why didn't you get that paper done in time?" And not recognizing the full picture of how stressed out teens are in our society, and took a step back and allowed that teen to rest and sleep in that day, finish her paper. And I think she showed up late to school that day, but how beneficial that was for her. Who knows? Maybe her daughter had stayed up till 3 o'clock in the morning finishing that paper, drove to school and got in a crash. You never know what that letting her stay home meant. And it's okay as parents to do that every once in a while, especially if you have a kid that's great and just has a full plate. Give them a break once in a while is okay. And I think parents need to hear that.
Absolutely.
you know,
Bravo to that mother, I would
right.
say. We all need a mental health day once in a while sometimes,
Yes.
regardless of age. But certainly teens who are doing so much, who are so busy, so involved in so many cases, sometimes it's just all too much. I think it's an argument to perhaps eliminate some activities, sometimes if it's possible, to try to prioritize sleep and rest and leisure time even, because there's a lot of creativity we know from research now that arises from leisure time, a lot of great thinking. So I think it really is a conversation that all parents really need to have with their kids. And again, I kick myself. I really never took a look and said, wow, he's really tired. Like he's really tired a lot of the time. I don't think he was a great sleeper growing up either. And many people have sleep problems. So I think that's another aspect of this that's important to consider. There's so many people across the country who have sleep apnea and who have sleep issues. We hear about it all the time. I think we talk about it at work and at school. How did you sleep last night? And, so if you are not a good sleeper, that's going to increase the danger for you of drowsy driving, of driving tired. And so I think it's important to be aware of that as well. And also important to be aware of something I mentioned in the beginning, which is so many drowsy driving crashes occur close to home. And again, our inclination as humans is to say, oh, I'm really tired, but I've only got 2 more exits to home. I can do it. I can make it. You really need to stop, make the decision then to pull over to a safe place and sleep or call a friend. Or if you have passengers, you definitely want one of your passengers to drive at that point, or call your parents. We had always said to Alex when he started driving, he had been driving for a few months, about 6 months when he had his crash. We always said, if you're in any kind of trouble or difficulty on the road, pull over, stop, call us, we'll come get you. I think every parent is willing to do that, but kids never want to make their parents go out late at night. They never want people to go to any trouble in most cases. It's so worth it. It's so worth it to make that decision to get off the roadway at that point. And I think that's true with everything, whether you're impaired, whether you're distracted, whether you're drugged. If you have gotten yourself into a situation where you could potentially harm yourself, your passengers, or someone else on the roadway, the most responsible thing to do is to get off the road and to call for help. We all make mistakes, especially as young and experienced drivers. And so really important to rely on someone who is available to help you if you find yourself in that situation.
You're right. We all do make mistakes. It's just human nature. We can't be perfect, but it is important to be aware of getting enough sleep and how important it is, especially behind the wheel. So I want to thank you so much for sharing your story and talking with me today. And I wanted to ask you if you had anything else you'd like to mention before we wrap up today.
Yeah, one of the things that we find with drowsy driving is that it's often combined with other driving hazards. So people who are impaired may be very sleepy. People who use prescription drugs of any age, teens, baby boomers, older people who use many prescription drugs may find that those prescription drugs make them tired. We now have recreational marijuana in Massachusetts. That can certainly make you sleepy as well when you're driving and can impair you when you're driving. That's why we've developed our Shifting Gears program, which aims to teach teens in schools throughout Rhode Island, Massachusetts, and the rest of our territory about the dangerous intersection of marijuana use and driving. So, we have so many people in our society using prescription drugs today. We have recreational cannabis in many states. Drunk driving is still a huge problem, responsible for roughly a third or more than a third of our highway deaths in the US. So often we find that drowsy driving is a component of these other impairments. And so it's really important to know what kind of an impact the prescription drugs we may be taking could have on our driving. We have a great program at AAA called Roadwise RX, where you can actually go onto the site, plug in any prescription drugs that you might be taking, and you can see what kind of impact, including fatigue and drowsiness, those prescription drugs might have on your driving ability. So these are all important things to think about. Driving is the most dangerous thing that most of us do every day, with the exception of firefighters and, people who are working construction, et cetera. But for most of us, and certainly for most teens, driving is the most dangerous activity we engage in. So, when you're driving a 1-ton, 2-ton vehicle, 3-ton vehicle, you need to be aware of the fact that, you're covering the length of a couple of football fields in a couple of seconds. So if you look down to text for 3 or 4 seconds, you're covering, in many cases, when you're driving at 60 or 65 miles an hour, 2 or 3 football fields in that time. And a lot can happen. We have many more pedestrians and cyclists on the roads with us today, many more bike paths. There's so many reasons to be aware, and driving really commands and needs to command your full focus. You need to be fully present behind the wheel. I actually rarely even talk on the phone anymore when I'm driving. And that's because our AAA Foundation for Traffic Safety Research tells us that hands-free talking on the phone is not risk-free. So don't assume, we
Same.
shouldn't assume that just because we're hands-free and not holding a phone, that it's safe to have a prolonged conversation. So many people talking to their boss about the budget at work, or talking to a friend, having a serious conversation that has a lot of cognitive drain on our brains. We need to be putting that brain power on our driving, not on our phone conversation. So I always say that our cars are not mobile social centers, where we stay connected to our friends, our family, our office, our work. Our cars are a place where we really need to prioritize safety.
That's a great point. And I agree with you completely. And since being in this role and in a traffic safety role and having read the statistics about distracted driving, and I too have stopped those long conversations in the car, because as a young parent, that was the one place I could have a full conversation with someone at some days. But I agree with you. It's important to, put the phone down completely. Don't be on phone calls, um, and pay attention to the road, because it is the most
Absolutely.
important thing you're doing
Absolutely.
is driving.
That's right. Exactly
Yeah.
right. And I'm sure you're modeling great behavior do you have a son or a daughter, Becky?
Son.
For your son. What's his
Yeah.
name?
Gabriel.
Gabriel. I love that name. That's a
Thanks.
great name. Yeah. The angel, right?
Little
But
angel.
that's right. Yeah. Hopefully he's an angel most of the
He
time,
is.
right?
He is. He's a good boy.
That's great. But I congratulate you on the great work that you're doing. So important to be working with teens, with young drivers, to make sure they're safe. There is nothing more tragic than to lose a young person in the prime of his or her life to a crash. And there's nothing more gratifying, and I speak from experience on this, to know that your life has been preserved, that your family life is intact, that your family is intact, because of a seatbelt, because of someone paying attention, because of someone not driving drunk or drowsy or impaired. So, I really commend you for the great work that you and your organization are doing, because you're helping to save lives.
Thank you. We feel it's important, and it's a traffic safety is sometimes overlooked, and it's an important subject that is related around mental health and substance use, because whether or not you have any of those things going on in your life, you're also getting into a car. So it's important to always highlight traffic safety, because like you mentioned, it's one of the most dangerous things most of us do every single day. So
You know
thank
what, Becky? I'm so glad you said that the traffic safety is so often overlooked, because in 2020, according to the National Safety Council, more than 42,000 people, more than 42,000 of us lost our lives on the roadways in the United States. And you know what? So many of those crashes were preventable. So many of those people could have been saved with seatbelts, with airbags, with more attention paid to the roadway, less distraction, less drowsiness, less impairment. So, you are absolutely right. I think that's a great note to end on, that we lose so many people on our roadways every single day. 9 people every day lost to distracted driving crashes. So drowsiness is a form of distraction. So you know what? We can work together to save so many of those people, to keep so many of those people alive. So
Yeah.
buckle up, everyone.
Buckle up, get your rest, and stay safe behind the wheel, right? And as your
That's
son
right.
mentioned, it can happen to anyone. So get
It can
your
happen to
rest.
anyone. And I know I've felt sleepy behind the wheel many times. I think just about everybody can relate to that, can relate to drowsy driving. So prioritize your sleep, get your rest, and wear your seatbelt.
Mhm. Thank you. That's great advice. And I just want to thank you again for sharing your story with us today. And please send our best to Alex. And I'm so happy everyone's doing well. So thank you again for being a part of this episode today. And that's that's all I got. But thank you so much.
Thank you, Becky. It's been a real pleasure. And yeah, so happy that I'm one of the lucky ones. And I want to make sure that moving forward, there are more people out there who are as fortunate as I have been, who can keep their families intact, even in the event of a crash. So thank you so much. And thank you for all the great work you do.
Thank you, Mary. Have a great day.
You too.